The curse of the undead, carriers of the dark sign. But life eternal is no curse. Humanity's fleeting form is but a prop, and to go hollow, yes, indeed, to go hollow. Eternal death is the true curse of the dark sign. In the narrative backdrop of Dark Souls, curses are made persistent through the undead curse, which invariably defines our own undead protagonist. But there are other, seemingly unrelated instances of this concept throughout the game. So what, exactly, constitutes a curse in this world? For all their many differences, transposition seems to be a connection shared between all the examples that can be found, making curses not a proper power pool in their own right, but something more akin to natural philosophy and alchemy instead, in the practical application of studies concerned with transmutation in many forms. Starting with the undead curse, symptoms include the dark sign and hollowing. Hollowing is the decay of both body and mind, and the dark sign, it's worth pointing out, isn't a natural phenomenon. Men were not born with the dark sign, but rather branded with it, as exemplified by the first men of the Ringed City, who carry a similar brand on their armors and showcase a prototype phase of such experiments. And how can the dark sign cause hollowing, one might wonder? Well, besides the swirling darkness on one's body, the sign also manifests itself as a ring of fire around the undead. Considering the pre-existing sign of dark, and how we used to undo hollowing by burning humanities, that is dark, at a bonfire, then it's safe to say that this curse is fueled by darkness. The curse transposes darkness into flame, which, in turn, burns the dark an undead would naturally draw as nourishment from the abyss, causing the withering effect known as hollowing. A clever and insidious system that not only robbed us of our immortality, but also ensured the undead would be pitted against each other in their search for ever more humanities, all the while refueling the first flame one humanity at a time, staving off the inevitable dark until a champion of light can be found. And these experiments that lead to the creation of the dark sign were, without a doubt, conducted by one Sif the Scaleless. I had originally breached the topic of this research in Of Gods and Monsters, my crossbreed experiments video. And within the context of this theory, it's also worth pointing out that Sif's research on full display at the Grand Archives causes cursing, a clear indication he'd have researched this subject at some point. This also helps to explain the presence of man-eater shells in Sif's crystal cave, since they either produce or were imbued with purging stones, as a byproduct of these experiments or a tool used in them, respectively. The pearl of one such shell eternally adorning Shira's headband, a twisted memento of the experiments that had fathered the so-called daughter of the Duke. And lastly, Sif's experimentation with curses helps to explain both petrification and some of what's found in Ash Lake too. Ash Lake is perhaps most notorious for housing the Stone Dragon, but Sif studied curses in this place as well, judging by the presence of man-eater shells. And since dark seems like a common component for both curses and crossbreeding, it becomes clear then that this dragon was a part of the crossbreed experiments, for it does provide us with stone dragons. instruments that temporarily transmute the undead into half-dragon crossbreeds, after all. Combining the research of curses with crossbreeding seems more natural now that we've theorized curses are akin to alchemy, since crossbreeding would entail the transposition of both the body and the essence of the beings involved in the process. I should also draw attention to the fact that, in stark contrast to all others of its kind, the Stone Dragon is a completely passive creature. It will never attack the player, not even in self-defense. Such behavior would further indicate this specimen was likely artificially created or, at the very least, experimented upon. And it being specifically called a Stone Dragon opens up a couple more venues of exploration. First, it leads us to the subject of petrification. In theory, petrification is exclusive to Dark Souls 2, but actually, in this distant land, petrification is just the original curse mechanic by another name, which can be discerned by comparing the effects of both statuses. And, confusingly enough, Dark Souls 2's curse mechanic is a different kind of curse, whose primary effect is to repeatedly trigger the Curse of the Dark Sign, causing gradual hollowing. As I've stated, there are many forms of curses, and petrification seems fueled by a combination of dark and that mineral-like ancient power pool associated with the Archtrees and everlasting dragons of yore. In Dark Souls 1, Sif's Crystal Breath and his Crystal Golems induced this kind of curse on the player, leaving a crystallized body behind. And considering his primordial crystal contained dark within itself, which was the source of Sif's immortality, and also that basilisks can naturally induce the same kind of cursing, then it would seem this world maintains a natural balance between these two ancient forces. A balance that shifted as the eons went by, a process demonstrated in-game by the evolution of dark-infused minerals. At first, there were none. There was a dark upgrade path, then called Occult, but it required white Titanites. Then, in Dark Souls 2, a single type came into existence, the Dark Knight Stones. In Dark Souls 3, however, there are dark, hollow and deep gems, and, once we go far enough into the future, dark has so thoroughly overtaken its mineral counterpart that dark gems can even be seen sprouting out of curse-afflicted enemies and growing out of the abyssal swamp, or at least that is until we reach Gale's end times, when the primordial serpents have already plundered the strength of the abyss and left this world. At that time, the sole remaining ancient force is free to retake its place, reverting this plane back into something akin to that pre-First Flame Grey world. Though, without dragons and Archtrees, we're left with only a barren desert and Dying Hollows instead. And now we get to talk about the second venue of exploration I had mentioned. Now we get to talk about the descendants of the Stone Dragon. If you've seen my previous videos, then you're aware Duke Tseudora was tasked with continuing the crossbreed experiments for Gwynevere. And you also know Vendrick's forces had been to Tseudora at some point. So it can be concluded that, in order to recreate his ancient dragon, Aurea drew knowledge from Tseudora's research, much like the Duke himself had drawn from Sif's before that. Aurea's dragon resides in the Dragon Shrine, a location that also houses the Dragon Remnant's Covenant. This is an offshoot of the Path of the Dragon Covenant, which was originally accessed through the Stone Dragon himself, but These warriors worship Calamity instead. This is made clear visually through their helms, which present the likeness of the Black Dragon, and then even more so by their weapons descriptions, such as they read: "The Black Dragon lost its tail to a brave warrior in a magnificent battle, and the tail was later used to forge several legendary weapons." And lastly, that location also features an enshrined, petrified dragon egg, which, in all likelihood, came from the Stone Dragon, lending even more credence to the idea Sif would have created that dragon, and that his research would have allowed Aurea to create his. So, considering all of these things, the petrified egg, the Stone Dragon's participation in Sif's crossbreeding experiments in the dark, this shrine's worship of Calamity, it does become painfully clear the game is telling us the Black Dragon was the offspring of the Stone Dragon. And from that, we can draw yet another conclusion, stating that Midir, another dragon with a connection to the dark, was born of the Stone Dragon too. Only Midir would have been raised by the gods from birth and kept out of sight in the Ringed City. Other examples of a curse's transformative properties include the monstrosities of Sin, whose curse turned them into the soul-feeding creatures we meet. Their form, uncannily similar to Menos's anatomy, hints that what transpired in Ulasil was born of a curse as well, an idea compounded by Artorias' curse and another similar event that would transpire in that same place many years in the future. The curse that befell New Londo and turned its inhabitants into ethereal ghosts. In both cases, we can see the transmutation of the body in Menos and the inhabitants of Ulasil, and the transmutation of one's essence, exemplified by Artorias as a god infused with dark, and, on the other end of the spectrum, by the ghosts as darkless humans instead. Now, dark in and of itself isn't enough to produce such transformations, as evidenced by the previous arguments and the lack of deformed creatures in the Dark Chasmon of old, which is simply the Abyss by a different name. Taking this fact into consideration, then it is also worth considering the possibility Velka's transformation into a crow-like creature, as depicted in the statues of the Cathedral of the Deep, may also have been caused by her meddling with curses, likely during the process of creating the canvas for the painted world. And the last example of curses as alchemical transmutation, before moving on to more salient applications, comes from the transposing kiln. This kiln can be found inside the curse-rotted Greatwood, where objects specifically stated to be cursed were placed into, and lo that its application is the purest embodiment of alchemy, with its sole purpose being that of transposing souls into something else entirely. And a few notes regarding this kiln, starting with its origin. It is stated by its description that this object is crafted from the hide of crystal lizards, but I believe this must be ravenous, rather than the regular kind. Their scales have runes carved on them, indicating they are artificially created. Not to mention, if simply eating a soul were enough to transform a crystal lizard into a ravenous one, then we would certainly have seen one before. And the crafting of the kiln would serve as the objective for their creation. Since we figuratively feed souls into the kiln, then literally feeding souls to the lizard is probably part of the process, and given that the kiln is cursed, a curse must be involved as well. Regarding the runes found in such scales, then, it bears mentioning they are the same ones once found on Titanite demons. So it's probable the process through which Titanite slabs were created also involved curses. Remember that the weapons and armors of the first men were forged in the Abyss, and since there was no established human society at that point, then these were likely forged by the nameless blacksmith deity, who had also forged the weapons of the gods. And in order to gain entrance to the Abyss, the blacksmith deity would have entered a covenant with the primordial serpents, much like Artorias, which would first justify the curse connection we just made, and second, it would explain his status as nameless, since that would have been reason enough for him to have been exiled, just like the Nameless King. This connection between Titanite slabs and the Abyss also helps to explain why later, more mundane weapons than the ones wielded by the first man would also betray a smidgen of life, like, for instance, the Executioner's Greatsword. And finally, on a very speculative note, the blacksmith deity's foray into the Abyss may also explain how Titanite slabs were found in ancient layers of earth in distant places such as Drangleic, since these slabs are crafted objects rather than natural mineral formations, and since the Abyss is historically depicted as being underground, then slabs may have surfaced from within the Abyss and later simply dug out. So, I think that's a solid framework from which to analyze the nature of curses. There's really no other consistent enough through line, I think. And it is quite befitting, I would say, that in the world of Dark Souls, a world built by the gods, something otherwise as trivial as a field of science would be dubbed something as sinister as a curse, on account of its apparent dependency on the dark. A bolt of lightning is divine and good. A sphere of dark is a hex and a forbidden evil, even though both their purposes are singular, to smite one's enemy dead onto the ground. Morality is a state of mind. The Profane Flame is where I, personally, started the exploration of the most interesting through line in this theory. We'll establish a couple of fundamentals here and explain some of the circumstances surrounding it as well. First, we should note that Dark Souls 3's Profane Flame Pyromancy is Flame Suave from Dark Souls 2, and as I had stated, in The Good, the Bad and the Rotten, that spell, in conjunction with the rest of Strade's work and the Old Witch Soul, were used in the creation of the Sinner's Flame, sitting atop Hades' Tower of Flame. This connection makes it more likely that the Profane Flame was brought from Hades rather than created here. Adding to it, there's the fact the Profane Coal is contained within an icy skull, which alludes to ice magic. This kind of magic could have originated in Irithyll, but, considering the previous argument, it is also more likely that ice magic from Lilian Lois was used instead. Remember that Nashandra originally came from Lordran, much like her sisters in all probability, which includes Alsana, the Silent Oracle. And besides the Eye of the Priestess, which is a precursor to the Eye of a Firekeeper, Tsorig also presents a direct line to Ilion Lois through the Black Iron Set, which stems from Anor Londo, and his Night Slayer's ring, which was the Ivory Warrior ring in Dark Souls 2. And in light of Guinevere's, also known as the Great Dead One, connection to Fina, plus Tsurig's incursion to Drangleic, it seems Anor Londo had sent an expedition to that land and coordinated their exodus back to the land of the gods, which is only reasonable, I must say. At some point, Guinevere and Olafis, and later Nashandra as well, all simply fell off the face of the earth. Of course, Anor Londo would eventually send their own to ascertain the situation in their previous colonial expanse. In the meantime, Yorm would have conquered that land, but for reasons yet unknown, their kingdom must have fallen to ruin, as kingdoms in Dark Souls are odd to do. So they left toward Lordran, and, despite his previous position as a ruler and his lineage of conquerors, Yorm and his people must have initially settled peacefully underground. If they had laid siege to Anor Londo, only one of two possibilities could have come to pass. They would either have won the war and laid claim to Anor Londo proper, instead of settling underground, or they'd have lost the war and not have been given a place to settle at all, underground or otherwise. Then, considering that place is known as the capital, it also seems like they eventually elected to secede from that arrangement and establish a new kingdom of their own, likely spurred by the greed instilled by the profane flame at the heart of their city. But an independent kingdom right in their backyard would most certainly not sit well with the gods of Anor Londo. Measures would most certainly have to be taken. Now, I'd like to remind you of the theory I presented in Primordial Flame, stating Fina/Rosaria had planted the Crystal Sage within the ranks of the Acolytes of Faron in order to bring them down from the inside. And, in a similar fashion, she also placed an agent saboteur within the capital as well. According to the Profane Flame Pyromancy, the destruction wrought by that flame happened after Yorm had left to link the first flame, not at its creation. And, according to Eleanora's description, the flame was triggered by the women who became the monstrosities of sin. This means the destruction of the capital was deliberate. But unlike the original Sinner's Flame, this one didn't destroy any buildings, it only charred the people of the capital. The fire, born of the sky, is said to have incinerated naught but human flesh. The only survivors of this incident were the handmaids and a lone sorcerer currently atop the building, where the monstrosities of sin reside. Both the handmaids and the sorcerer carry instruments imbued with the power of the profane flame, lanterns and a gargoyle flame hammer, respectively. This indicates the profane flame didn't choose its targets indiscriminately, but it spared those who carried items linked to it. And since the sorcerer would have no reason to carry a flame hammer, this means he did so purposefully, knowing it would save him from the raging flames. When we approach the capital proper, the profane flame shoots fireballs at us, but it no longer does so after we've killed the handmaids standing next to it, meaning the flame has to be operated by someone in order to function in this capacity. All this means the handmaids and this particular sorcerer were involved in the destruction of the capital. The monstrosities are said to have been relatives of a certain oracle, that is, a cleric, and the court sorcerer set explains these sorcerers, such as the one wielding the flame hammer, used to be oracles themselves, indicating that sorcerer is said certain oracle. The building where they can all be found is a cathedral, judging not only by its architecture, but also by the presence of Wrath of the Gods, the only miracle found in the capital. This miracle is originally from Lordran, and has been previously associated to Fina through the resonance connection, as presented in my Bloodlines video. So, finally, by taking into consideration the shared modus operandi used by Fina to deal with the Acolytes of Farron, all of this combined serves to indicate this particular cleric worked for Fina, and that the destruction of the capital was orchestrated by Anorlondo. And just a quick side note here, that the capital handmaids likely originally served Fina and Anorlondo, just as the shrine handmaids served Rosaria and Lothric, which explains their continued service to Anorlondo in Irithyll Dungeon, and their choice of attire, changing from white to black, reflecting the same change Gwyndolin in Fina's garments went through. With all of this out of the way, we can bring this discussion back to curses. And the argument is pretty simple, really, where the Profane Flame spell is, indeed, a pyromancy. The nature of the Profane Flame proper is based on something else entirely. That flame is the byproduct of a reaction based on blood and darkness. The Profane Flame was born of a curse, which can be deduced from the profaned coal that enables the usage of dark, hollow and blood gems, but nothing flame related. This explains how it could have been triggered by the curse of the monstrosities, such as the cursed jars triggering the undead curse. It is corroborated by Eleonora's ability to temporarily infuse weapons with bleed damage. It fits my previous theories regarding the relationship between the First Flame, the Chaos Flame and the Dark, and also the current one when I mentioned Velka may have used curses in the creation of the painted word canvas, which is painted in blood after all. This also gives more context to Yorm's conscription as a Lord of Cinder. Yorm agreed to link the First Flame in hopes of quenching the Profaned Flame, meaning its influence was growing stronger, even though it was only triggered after he left. But if there was a need for a Lord of Cinder, then that must have meant the First Flame was waning, establishing an inversely proportional dynamic between the two flames, which directly mirrors the dynamic between the First Flame and the Dark Sign, whose Ring of Fire is another example of a cursed-born flame, and whose effects of reducing one's max health is also mirrored by the Profane Flame-fueled lanterns of the jailers in Irithyll Dungeon. If the world of Dark Souls has taught us anything, it's to never take anything for granted, to always question everything, for things are often not what they seem without further scrutiny. Without the necessary knowledge to decipher the world around us, we are all but mindless hollows, all subjects to a most pernicious curse. Beside the Profane Flame itself, the surroundings of the cathedral where the curse that triggered it was born should also provide clues that will help with exploring other curses as well. Here, a couple of details unique to this location stand to notice: the swamp and the centipedes. Dark Fog states that dark can have an effect that is indistinguishable from poisoning. There are no sources of poison in this area, but there is a clear source of dark, the curse of the monstrosities. So, Occan's Razor would dictate that, despite first impressions, this swamp is actually dark in nature. a byproduct of the curse that transpired here. This fact compounds with the similarity I had mentioned regarding the capital and the acolytes of Faron, since Faron Keep is also surrounded by a seemingly inexplicable poisonous swamp that is contained to that area. So, then, the bodily transformation the Grus underwent fit our definition of curses. The trees in the keep have developed pustule-looking growths similar to the ones found in the rotted greatwood, further corroborating the idea of a curse-produced swamp. The sage's coal found in that area indicate they had made use of dark for some previously unstated purpose, given that it enables the use of deep gems, much like the profaned coal enabled dark gems. And the Grus themselves provide the clue we need to trace back the origin of the curse that befell them. Elder Grus, to be more precise. You see, their heads bear a striking resemblance to the Warlock mask from Dark Souls 2. This mask is plainly associated with Aldia by its description. Warlocks in Aldia gave rise to wicked things, and even cast forbidden rituals upon themselves. But, as usual, there's more to it than what's plainly stated by the game. This item had a fixed drop from a lion warrior in the Shaded Ruins. Why would a lion warrior, of all creatures, be in possession of such a mask? They are neither Aurian nor warlocks. Well, in this bit of lore, the clues aren't what's found in-game, but rather what's missing from it. Lion warriors are befittingly garbed in a lion warrior set, complete with a headpiece. In the same area, though, we can also find the lion mage set, stashed away inside a chest. But the mage's set is distinctively missing the headpiece of its warrior counterpart. The warlock mask, held by a lion warrior, is the missing piece of the lion mage set. Further still, the lion mages themselves are missing from this location. The mages and also lionesses. The Lion Clan was created by Tseudora, just like Tark and Ashka, residing in the same area. There is a scorpion and a scorpioness. There are lions, but no lionesses. Well, the hair of Aldian warlocks is reminiscent of the lion warrior's mane, and their slim figure would fit the expected anatomy of a lioness. So, I believe the Lion Clan assigned their males to the warrior caste, and females to the mage caste. Then, when Vendrick's forces came along, the mages changed their allegiance and sided with Auria instead. And to anyone who has traversed these forgotten ruins, the sound of wicked laughter shall be the source of nightmares forevermore. Who among us could forget the cursing jars? Such fragile yet strangely frightening things. These aren't natural sources of cursing, though. Curse-inducing darkness was harvested and stored by the Lion Clan, whose warriors induce curse build-up, even though their weapons do not. The lions themselves have been imbued with cursing. And if a curse resulted in the malformed Elder Grus, then this curse was used to create similar creatures here as well, from which the lion mages crafted their masks. The ability to manipulate such curses freely made their mages instrumental for Aulia, for continuing Sif's research and collaterally producing the malformed creatures his keep would later be known for. And Sullivan's association with both Auria and Rosaria, who orchestrated the fall of the Undead Legion, makes him a direct link between the Lion's Curse and the curse of Faron Keep. going back to the profaned capital, we need to talk about the centipedes. Just like the monstrosities in the swamp, capital centipedes are contained to the cathedral area, and they also drop purging stones, further indicating they are connected to the same curse. Centipedes can also be found in the painted world of Ariandel and Irithyll. Painted world centipedes also drop purging stones and can be explained if we accept Velka used curses in the creation of its canvas. Irithyll centipedes, on the other hand, drop green blossoms instead. These creatures are known for their scraggly hair, insect-like appearance, and toothed-looking ribcage appendages. Now, Sullivan, Deacons of the Deep, stemming from Honor Londo, and Londor Pilgrims all show a root-like growth from beneath their garments and shells, and in the case of the Deacons, that is also visible coming from the inside of their eye sockets. Londor Pilgrims have been infected by an insect-looking creature that comes out of their shells in the Ringed City. These parasites spawn angels that also look like bugs. This obviously means they are the source of the pilgrim butterflies in Lothric Castle as well, though the butterflies seem like a not fully formed version of the angels, forced to hatch prematurely. Their wings have the same appearance of the root-like growth of the Londor Pilgrims, and their limbs can also be seen crawling from under their shells. And Sullivan's wings are almost identical to the butterfly's wings. Sullivan, the Deacons, and the Pilgrims have all been infected by the same insect-like creatures. The root-like growth resembles the centipede's hair, and both pilgrim butterflies and Sullivan beasts share on the centipede's ribcage anatomy. They have all been infected with centipedes. And even though outside references are not canon, not even if they come from other Soulsborne games, I'd be remiss not to mention centipedes also cause infestation in both Bloodborne and Sekiro. The fruit hanging from the curse-rotted greatwood has the same roots/hair and what looks like bug feet sticking out of them, and they twitch independently from the tree's movement, indicating there's something alive inside of them. Next to the Great Woods Arena is the location where we find the blue-robed cleric set. These clerics' back covers resemble the ones from the Londor Pilgrims, especially when seen in the distant future of the Ringed City. According to the Hollow's Ashes, Londor has its roots in Lothric. People placed curses inside the Great Wood, but a reason for this practice has never been specified. The centipedes were originally created through curses, but that process was too demanding. So they cursed the Great Wood and used it to grow the centipedes in its root. That's why Irithyll centipedes drop green blossoms instead of purging stones, because they've been harvested. They were then used to infect the undead clerics who later became the Pilgrims of Londor and, ultimately, Angels of Light and Death. There is some confusion when it comes to giants in Dark Souls, prompted by the differences on how each installment of the series chose to present them. The first question that comes to my mind is, what hides beneath those masks? Do they have regular faces like Yorm and the Adjudicators, or are they faceless like the Giant Lord? Well, While it is possible to unmask the giant blacksmith, for instance, that's just not canon. But the skeletons of giants in the Tomb of Giants, those had faces, did they not? There's no reason to assume other Lordran giants were any different. So, what gives with the giants of Dark Souls 2? There's an old idea that those giants may have been using golem bodies, giving their giant gaping holes. But, as far as I'm aware, that idea never went beyond this simple statement. I do believe in it, though, and I'm here to make a more compelling case for it. Let me start by saying, since Anor Londo was probably built on the back of enslaved giants, it is likely that Guinevere had brought giants with her when she relocated to Ys Peninsula, and also that some people seem to take Welager's words to mean Vendrick had brought the golems from the Land of Giants. The king crossed the ocean and defeated the giants with the queen at his side. The king commandeered their power and created the golems. That dialogue doesn't actually say that, though. I realized I could do a better job at explaining myself on this point, so here we go. Welager's dialogue says Vendrick used whatever he brought from the Land of Giants to create the golems, not that he brought the golems from that land. And since the game is pretty clear that his prize was the souls of giants, then he used those souls to create the golems, among other things. Now we just need to figure out where the knowledge necessary to create such golems comes from. So now back to the show. But then, where did they come from? Well, there are golems in Ilion Lois too. We know Vendrick's forces have been there, first and foremost because the Frozen Flower can be found in Drangleic Castle, but also because the Elite Knights stranded there carry Llywelyn and Rebel shields, which are associated with Welager and Rain. And given how Rain ended up in Broomtower, it seems like he was in charge of bringing Vendrick's rule to distant lands. Now, while it's possible Rain brought golems with him and they were subsequently left behind, the placement of the golems found indoors suggests they belong here. Vendrick didn't bring the golems to Ilion Lois. Vendrick brought the golems from Ilion Lois to Drangleic. The Flexile Sentry as well is another creature usually believed to have been created in Drangleic, but one can be found in this very same place, and its location, again, suggests that it had always been there, since it currently stands surrounded by retainers, and if the sentry had been part of an invading force, every single one of those ladies would most certainly be dead by now. Another detail we should account for is that the golems in both places are actually different. The golems in Drangleic Castle only execute one specific action when activated, while the golems in Ilion Lois fight freely when they come to life. The golems in Drangleic have heads with markings. The golems in Ilion Lois do not. The markings on Drangleic golems are instructions. The giants having their soul-sucking holes in their head, where the markings/instructions would be, possibly explains how they were able to retain their mental faculties after their souls had been transferred. And since Lordran giants were treated as slaves, it's possible the golems were originally designed to further subjugate them. And lastly, that golems/giant bodies that grow into giant trees have a strange mark on their back. in the same location where the Mark of the Undead is supposed to be. Although very speculative, it's possible a variation of the Dark Sign curse had been used in the creation of this golem variant. Since the Dark Sign isolates us from the Abyss, the logic is that a curse with a similar effect would bind the giant's soul to its new body, preventing it from being either removed or replaced after its initial transfer. So, in light of recent revelations I have come to regarding post-Dark Souls 1 Anor Londo and Fina's heritage as a Sister of Chaos, I decided to take another look at the Demon Ruins. And yeah, apparently a lot of us, myself included, had gotten a lot wrong about the demons in Dark Souls 3. Well, here's what I've got. The most commonly accepted interpretation regarding the Demon Ruins in Dark Souls 3 is that it was besieged by Anor Londo, and that its inhabitants died in the ensuing battle. Cited as evidence for this conclusion are the Black Knights roaming its halls and the giant ballista brought by Irithyll giants. So, let's take a look at the doorway leading from the ruins to Irithyll. It would be odd enough just to have a doorway leading directly from demon territory to the doorsteps of Lower Anor Londo. But it gets even more strange than that. Looking at it from the outside, this is obviously not demon architecture. This is Anor Londo's. But it's not defensive, it's just ornamental. Then, looking at it from the inside, well, the door locks from the inside. The demons built this door leading to Irithyll, and then Anor Londo, instead of building barricades and walls, they just put a pretty bow on top of it. Okay, now, back to the ballista. What is the ballista currently used for? It shoots the hell out of us, sure, but we, the players, we use it too. We use it to kill the Sandworm. But here's the thing, the Sandworm is already dead. It's just a giant worm skeleton filled with skulls, so just as the ballista kills the worm now that it's, well, dead, it also killed the worm back when it was alive. Irithyll didn't bring the ballista to lay siege on the demons, they brought it to help them. And what of the Black Knights then? Well, they're never seen working with Anor Londo. They owed allegiance to Gwyn, and Gwyn is long gone. They're always just doing their own thing, so I think they went rogue and attacked the ruins out of their own volition, despite Anor Londo, not because of it. All of this fits perfectly with everything I've been saying for the past couple of videos, with Fina being a Sister of Chaos and Anor Londo opening its borders and embracing pyromancy to some extent. The problem then becomes just what the hell happened here? What killed the demons? The Black Knights? They sure are tough as fuck, but I'm sorry, they're not that tough. There are so many, just so many dead demons in the ruins. It would have taken an absurd number of Black Knights to cause that kind of genocide. I've seen some people try and explain it by saying they ran out of chaos and died, but the stray demon disproves that theory. First, because he ran out of chaos and he's still alive. And second, because he ran out of chaos and his body became this sandstone looking thing that looks nothing like the bodies in the ruins. Okay, so let's try looking at it from a different perspective. Instead of looking at who's dead, let's look at who's alive. Ghouls and demonic statues aren't demons. The list of demons still living is very short. There's the old Demon King, the demon standing guard at the entrance to the ruins, another one of those in the undead settlement, the aforementioned stray demon, and the demons in pain and from below that we meet in the Ringed City. Okay, pay attention now. This is an important question. What kind of demons are these? The No Chaos Stray Demon is a demon fire sage from Dark Souls 1. All the other ones, who still have chaos in them, I might add, what kind of demons are they? You don't know? Neither do I. They're no kind of demon we have ever seen before. It's a new breed of demons. Just look at them. It's a new breed of fucking demons. New fucking demons! How is it that we didn't all collectively lose our figurative shits over this when the game first came out is, quite frankly, beyond me. Except for the stray demon. All the old school demons are dead. All the Capras and Tauruses, all the Fire Sages. There's a Centipede demon in the mix. Even the Fair Lady and Kelana have passed away. But there's a new breed in town. And remember that the Bat of Chaos had birthed all the demons in Izalith, but the Bat of Chaos is gone. We killed it, you and I. The only reasonable explanation for all of this is that at some point they somehow created a new Bat of Chaos that birthed these new kinds of demons. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay, so what killed the original demons? Well, there's one particular spell found in the ruins that is very interesting, the Sacred Flame Pyromancy. It's interesting because it was, and I quote, originally used in a ceremony for cleansing sacrificial impurities. Do you see it now? The demons didn't die off, and they weren't killed either. They were sacrificed in a ritual created by conjoining the knowledge of Fina, demonstrated by the use of Sacred Flame, and Aurea's research, which can be surmised by the Chaos Bed Vestiges Pyromancy. We get this spell from the old Demon King's soul, but this isn't a spell from Izalith. It's Forbidden Sun from Dark Souls 2, a pyromancy developed in Aurian Rise. And I'll go even further and say this ritual was a kind of curse. Considering the catacombs were originally a part of these ruins, there's one very distinctive goblet filled with dark in the demon ruins, and there's another one used for blood at its entrance as well. Blood and darkness, same as the profane flame. They sacrificed themselves to perform a ritual that would relink the flame of chaos, creating a new Bat of Chaos and embering the whole of Ashlake in its wake. And considering how few of these new demons there are around, and that we never get to see the new Bat of Chaos, I'd say it's probably already dead. Despite the imposing boss fight, the original Bat of Chaos was a helpless, fragile little thing. This new one, created by less powerful beings than Izalith, probably just didn't live all that long, after all. As I live and breathe, a champion of Ash. But what does it truly mean to be unkindled? We've all glimpsed the truth of it already, haven't we? Londor, Rosaria, and Sullivan working in tandem to birth the so-called champions. Their incursion into Lothric, the deceit of the throne ritual. We've learned Alfreda was the true champion of Londor, the Ashen One meant for the mantle of lordship, and that after she rejected her calling, we were nothing but a backup plan. And that even when we succeed in becoming the Lord of Hollows, even when we harness the power of the curse and the first flame, we were still never anything more than pawns, unwise to the rules of the game. Snake eyes, the house always wins. Indeed, together we've glimpsed all of these truths already, but when it comes down to specifics, what really is an Unkindled and how did they come to be? Many will turn to one of Miyazaki's earlier interviews, where he provided a definition of sorts to that very same question, saying the Unkindled are the undead who tried and failed to link the first flame. But there are problems with this approach. First, this was a Chinese interview, so his answer in Japanese was translated to Chinese and then to English. And we all know how mistranslations can be a problem when interpreting the lore, don't we? Second, in every translation of it that I found, his answer seemed very vague. He seemed to be speaking mostly of themes rather than the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts lore we hunt for. And lastly, come on, you think Miyazaki would just give something like that away? Have you played Dark Souls? At best, this is a hint. At worst, it's a red herring. As always, we're left to do the hard work ourselves. To get this started, we can look at some of the differences between the Unkindled and regular undead. The most obvious ones are that we can't hollow without the Dark Sigil, and even when we do, it doesn't reduce our health as it once did. And also that we use embers instead of humanity to nourish ourselves back to full health. But there's another, very easy to miss difference in our hollowed form. Hollowed undead display the infamous swirling dark sign on their back. Hollowed unkindled have a white spiral on their chest instead. And since this spiral is only visible in our hollowed form, and since the Unkindled can only hollow by the power of the Dark Sigil, then I believe the spiral to be a byproduct of the sigil. The Dark Sigil is both described and depicted as a gaping hole, but that is not visible anywhere. So the hole would leak out this brand, whose appearance is evocative of an ashen dark sign, which suits the Unkindled very well, doesn't it? And this brings us back to Drangleic, or Olafis to be more precise. Here, buried deep within Tseldora, the statues lining the walls of Ornifex's workshop showcase the same design seen on Unkindled hollows. This is the earlier reference to Unkindled Ash in the Dark Souls timeline and is, therefore, representative of the first installment of these experiments. But I don't think this research was started by the Crow Demon, or not by her alone at the very least. She is located in Tseldora, home of the Duke, and I believe he was the main driving force here. He was tasked with continuing the crossbreed experiments for Guinevere, but, as I've shown in Lordom 5, the Duke had plans of his own. Being human, it stands to reason his efforts would focus on overcoming the undead curse, which makes the transition from his research into Aurea's ancient dragon that much more reasonable, seeing as they share this common primary goal. And having access to Sif's research would have been instrumental. We found the beginning of our trail here, in Tseldora, but this research can be traced all the way back to a pre-Age of Fire cycle. Sif's experiments with the Dark Soul and the creation of the Dark Sign, his later experiments with curses and crossbreeding, all leading to this very point in time, but as it can be surmised by a distinct lack of unkindled ones in Drangleic, and the presence of exactly one Hollow Duke too many, his research had obviously failed. From here, the trail takes us back to Dark Souls 3, where, just as they had brought the Painted Word to the Cathedral of the Deep and the Profaned Flame to the capital, among other things, the Drang Exodus also brought Tseldora's research and a giant tree, conspicuously placed within the birthplace of the Unkindled. Now, given Tseldora's connection to dragon crossbreeding, and Aurea's ancient dragon after that, it's likely that research focused on dragons as a key component. This factor carried over to Lothric's initial attempts, as can be seen in the Pus of Man producing wyverns of the Dragon Barracks. The Pus of Man, as I've argued in Lordom 4, being a byproduct of earlier unkindled prototypes. So, what changed that allowed Lothric to succeed where Tseldora had failed? Well, as the Firekeeper puts it, to be unkindled is to be a vessel for souls. Such an apt description could not be ignored in the face of the giant tree standing just outside the shrine. As I have explained in the preface, despite being associated primarily with giants, this is the body of a golem, and to be a golem is to be a vessel for souls, right? So I think the first step was likely to change how to implement ancient energy, moving away from dragons and shifting to the process used by giants to create their golems. Keep in mind, this isn't something native to Lordran. Somebody brought it from Drangleic specifically to this place, so they must have brought it for a reason. And note that this shift in their research is reflected by the prototypes of Lothric, many of whom would come to have trees growing out of them. This step is meant to turn an undead into a more fitting vessel for the First Flame, whose nature is mirrored by souls. Next, we have Embering, the manipulation of which was enabled by the ritual of Ash Lake. And while that ritual seems to have been inspired by Aurea's research, as previously deduced from Chaos Bad Vestiges, the move to incorporate chaos in the Unkindled experiments seems to have been inspired by Nadalia, Bride of Ash. Just as Tsorig served as a link to Illion Voice, where it pertains to the Profaned Flame, here he also serves as a link to Broom Tower, implied by the Fium Ultra Greatsword he wields. The fog produced by Nadalia induced cursing, but her Ashen Idols could cast pyromancies, and they also had acquired an appearance that would later become reminiscent of the Embered ones. So it would seem that, just as Dark Field curses can produce flame, Chaos Field curses have the ability to convert flame back into dark, a process that creates ash as a byproduct and explains why the Unkindled are unable to hollow. The Dark Sign denies the undead the nourishment they'd normally take from the abyss by burning dark into flame, but Nadalia's curse would bypass that system by allowing the Unkindled to convert that flame back into dark, providing the sustenance they need and effectively nullifying the original curse, and giving the ultimate purpose of an Unkindled, that is, to usurp the first flame. It is also worth noting that, in this context, Chaos may also serve as a kind of binding agent, meant to unite the first flame and the dark flame of humanity within the bosom of the Champion of Ash. This property of Chaos is exemplified in-game through the Twin Princes, whose curse is hinted at having involved Chaos by Prince Lothric's gold-hemmed black set, and consequently allowed them to merge their life forces. The Smoldering Grooves, whose chaos-infused bodies have another, smaller body hanging out of their backs, and possibly through the Flexile Sentries, since being originally from Ilion Lois, it is possible the notable presence of chaos in that land could have played a part in their creation too. And to the Unkindled, this power of amalgamation could be relevant when it comes to the Dark Sigil as well, allowing this tertiary curse to bind with the curse of the Dark Sign. And the Dark Sigil is, in fact, the last piece of this puzzle, combining Nadalia's Ashen curse with the curse of the Undead creates a balance between flame and dark, but by adding this final curse, which acts as a kind of catalyst, the yield of darkness is increased and the balance is thrown in disarray. We start producing so much darkness that it overflows, and if not properly managed, the excess dark can even take the form of a pus of man. And as the depths of dark grow deeper still, the more flame the curse will covet, to the point where even the first flame can be swallowed whole. Flame, oh flame. One curse to shackle darkness, another curse to set it free.
That tree shall be mine, for I am its gardener. All these things I shall arrange and put in their places. The seeds of the dead shall be dead, and all manner of degradations. Hunger shall they find, the dead shall be fed, and the degradations shall be found. I will pour my spells over them. I will protect and guide them with the fire of my eyes. On the day of my temple, when all the dead shall speak and bear witness to my works, I will do a great work. Even the dead shall do a great work for me. When the holy dead are weighed out upon the scales of my reward, it will be a great deal of flesh for me to cast out of the temple. I will make it so that the dead will come together and will not separate. They will not separate even from one another. They will not separate even from the earth. There is no exile in my land. There is no death in my land. I have planned everything. I am but a child, yet even I know that I can hide nothing from the eyes of the one who sees.
To reiterate on Prince Lothric's curse, the game states that he was born ill, but not cursed. The curse was a later development. Since there are still demons in Lothric, I think it happened right after Lorien fought the Demon Prince, and it was meant as a last resort. They were under siege, things were falling apart, and he may have believed this was the only way to make sure his younger brother could go ahead with the throne ritual. And there's also the possibility that it was fueled by Knight's blood as well, like they do have blood-filled goblets with the statues of beheading knights around there, right? A couple of interesting questions from my patrons. First, Ethan asked whether the centipedes are related to the witch trees in the Painted World, like whether they were trees who were then transformed into centipedes. Well, they do bear a striking physical resemblance, but considering the painting was created through a curse, and that there are other examples of overgrown insects in said painting, and also that it would kind of require witch trees to have been around the capital's cathedral, I'm inclined to say no, I don't think they're related. Though I'm still not sure about that. I'll make sure to comment about it on a future lore dump if anything comes to light. And John caught me by surprise, as always, asking, was Aurea a bed of chaos then? That I was inclined to say yes when he asked me that. I think I wanted to say yes because, well, doesn't it kind of feel right? The way he looked, and, it's Aurea. But he never showcases any of the traits we'd normally associate with a bed of chaos, like spawning demons, for instance. So, no. As cool as that have been, there's no real reason to assume Aurea became a bed of chaos. Regarding the swamp of Faron Keep, we should mention the Elder Grus are able to summon flying, exploding skulls from the ground. These skulls seem like the same ones summoned by Gale, and they also remind me of the flying skulls of Dark Souls 1. The ones found floating on the path to the Tomb of the Giants and summoned by the masses of souls in New Londo. New Londo definitely had a mass-scale curse take place there, and the masses of souls fit the transformative process of curses we've proposed. So, if the swamps in Faron Keep and the cathedral are derived from curses, then these skulls help create yet another pattern. Their composition seems to fit the other New Londo inhabitants' transformation into ghosts. The ones found in the catacombs likely just floated up there. The ones in Faron Keep are being summoned from the dead, who are left to rot in the cursed swamp. And Gale... I'm not sure about Gale, to be honest. This is why I added this bit to the side notes. Given his state when we meet him at World's End, it's not hard to imagine something curse-related has befallen him, but I'm still too fuzzy on the details. I'll let you know once I have more on that subject. I talked about new demons in the video, so I have to address the old Iron King and the Centipede Demon as well, right? The Centipede Demon is said to have been born of the orange charred ring, which was given to Sisyphus' discharge by his sisters and immediately dropped into the lava. This means its existence doesn't directly contradict my theory about a new bed of chaos to birth a new breed of demons, but it's also so vague, some might have seen it as a reason to doubt a bed of chaos would have been needed at all. And also, this is one of those instances when the game is being pretty explicit about something, but if you don't apply a little bit of critical thought to it, you end up with a 10-foot amalgamation of giant centipedes born of a ring for reasons. So, in order to avoid all of that mess, let's break this down, shall we? Before we begin, I'd like to thank a viewer named Tyler Hansen, who was kind enough to send me a comment pointing out a possible connection between the Sword server and Velka's Rings of Sacrifice. The timing was so perfect, I fear a Greek god is going to smite me anytime now, but in any case, thanks man, I really appreciate that. Okay, so a few preliminary points. The orange charred ring was made by a Chaos Witch. Velka was a Chaos Witch. Velka has rings of sacrifice that are also meant to protect its wearer and are created in sacrificial rites. And we can find server in Blighttown. Now, my conclusion is that the centipede demon didn't spawn from the ring itself. I think it's probably a deformed egg burden instead. Which sounds weird, I guess, but let's see how I got there. The Sword server can be found near the demon ruins. It has a curious pattern carved on its blade, it restores HP on each hit, and it's said to have been used in ancient rites. It is also said to be imbued with a frightful occult energy, with the occult being largely associated with Velka, and that portion of the description also changes if you ascend the weapon to either fire or chaos, becoming imbued with a frightful heretical energy, a curious feature that further connects the weapon to Izalith. So, Tyler's suggestion was that the sword would have been used in the sacrificial rites that created the Rings of Sacrifice, since, besides those connections, hitting an enemy until it dies with a sword used in ancient rites is, well, basically a sacrifice. Also, the HP regen effect follows the same theme as the ring since, in practice, they're both meant to protect their wielder. So, the server is based on a Ram Dao, which is used to decapitate sacrifices. This bit is an outside reference, so it cannot be taken as canon, but, nevertheless, given its connection to Izalith and that its engraving kinda looks like a maggot, I think it was used to decapitate egg-infested sacrifices. The maggots are soul-leeching creatures and must be soul-filled before hatching from the egghead. The rite would compound that effect with the server's life-leeching properties, and the sacrifice would then be used to create the Rings of Sacrifice. Since the orange charred ring was also created by a Chaos Witch, and also generally serves the same purpose of offering protection to its wielder, then such sacrifices were probably used in its creation as well. This not only helps shed some light on Velka's sacrificial rites and the creation of these rings, but also on the egg burden themselves. Like, why are they egg burdened? What is the point of that? And yeah, sure, they're the original simps, trying to show they're fully committed to their mistress, but why maggots? Why that thing? Well, this is why, I guess. They were harvesting soul-leeching maggots. And just a itsy-bitsy tiny note that, in the wild, maggots probably grow to become burrowing rockworms that share similar anatomy and live in the same location as well. Okay, back to the centipede demon. That creature's general anatomy fits the anatomy of an egg-burdened person. And there are similarities between the maggots, centipedes, and rockworms as well, with the pincers, body shape, and tiny legs. So, I think the maggots of an egg burdened absorbed the ring and its properties, resulting in the deformed creature we meet. The centipede demon has the ribcage appendages seen in curse-born sewer centipedes, and since Velka used curses, then it's likely she used a curse in the creation of the orange charred ring, meaning this property both fueled the transformation and influenced the outcome as well. The ring had originally been created by using sacrificed maggot carriers and their accumulated souls. Now, all of that was infused back into another bunch of soul-absorbing maggots, allowing them to ascend to their final kaiju form. And that's how I think the Centipede Demon came to be. It doesn't contradict anything in the lore, and is a much less random explanation than centipedes from rings just because. Or, at least, I think it is. And now we get to have a bit of a Ship of Theseus discussion, and for that we need to ask ourselves, what makes a demon a demon? Calling a creature a demon doesn't necessarily make it so. For comparison's sake, regarding linguistics, the distinctively human forest hunter Archer was later called a god in Drangleic. Critical thought must be applied even in the face of explicit nomenclature. And gods stem from the same hollow-like creatures the furtive pygmy and its descendants come from. So, if we're to classify them as belonging to two distinct groups, gods and humans, then distinctions must be made. In that case, one group came to draw all its power from the first flame, while the other drew from the abyss. Easy. What about demons, though? Well, born directly out of chaos and, furthermore, a bed of chaos at that, seems like a good parameter. That would probably exclude the likes of the covetous demon and the demon of song, for instance, whom I think nobody actually believes were demons in the sense we usually think of, that is, Izalith demons. And, given all the previous arguments, it would exclude the centipede demon as well. There's no way to prove the new breed of demons in Dark Souls 3 are actual demons according to this definition, but, honestly, they just look like demons. They are infused with chaos, and the naming of the Chaos Bed Vestiges pyromancy we get from the old Demon King's soul is a very pertinent hint, indicating a new bed of chaos was, indeed, created, birthed them, and perished, meaning now only its vestiges remain. And just one more point before moving on to the old Iron King. The bloated head hollows of the painted world of Ariamis always reminded me of the Egg Infested, especially considering we could get an egg vermifuge there. So, there's the possibility they were originally infested with maggots, then, later, under the influence of the curse used to create the painting, those maggots transformed into silver centipedes. It would fit the infestation motif to a T, and also make a good connection between the ribcage thing from both silver centipedes and the centipede demon. I didn't add this to the main body of the theory because I'm still looking into the possibility silver centipedes come from witch trees instead, but at the moment I think this one has more potential. Okay, now, old Iron King. Well, nobody really assumes the Iron King was originally a 10-foot demon, right? He became that after he sank into the lava. The Japanese descriptions are also kind of explicit about his dead body being possessed by a spirit. So, we just end up having a similar situation to the centipede demon, where he simply doesn't contradict my theory, but, in his case, the origin is much easier to pinpoint. And lastly, the Gaping Dragon is another example of the ribcage feature we should probably mention, right? Arguably the oldest and meanest example of it as well. And it just so happens that it fits this theory like a glove since, as you may recall, there was a channeler present in that boss fight. Why would Sith place a channeler all the way down in the depths? Probably not to watch over the rats, so yeah, to keep an eye on the Gaping Dragon instead. We've already established Sif was experimenting with both dragons and curses, so the current state of the Gaping Dragon was likely the result of another one of his experiments. Alright, another hour-long video done. This was going to be a second look at the Profane Capital at first, but then I got going on the whole curse rabbit hole and, well, you go where the Lord takes you, right? And I'm glad that I did, to be honest. This topic feels like it's been kind of neglected by the community at large, but I hope I was able to share some light on it. Thank you all very much for watching, as always, and a very big thank you to these fine people at Patreon. John, Ethan Finlay, Sinclair Lore, Balan, Several Bets, Tyler Baldwin, and Chris, etc. If you wanna help support this channel, you can check either my Patreon page or my Ko-Fi for one-time donations. Every little bit will be greatly appreciated. Alternatively, you can just share my content, annoy your friends, family, and random strangers and get the word of Bob out there. That would help a bunch as well. And that's that, I guess. Until next time, stay safe and see you around.